Thomas Briggs had lived in Cedar Hollow's HOA for nearly 10 years, long enough to learn that peace and freedom were two things the association never allowed. Every week, another notice, another fine. When the HOA board raised dues again for landscaping enhancements, Thomas finally snapped. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and quietly said to his wife, "We're moving out. I'm done letting them control our lives." His wife nodded, tired but relieved. It felt like reclaiming air after years underwater. But as Thomas didn't yet know, some people in Cedar Hollow didn't like losing control. Within days, Thomas's "for sale" sign appeared. The HOA president, Karen Albright, spotted it during her morning dog walk and nearly dropped her leash. "He can't leave without our release approval," she muttered. That night, a letter appeared on Thomas's doorstep. "You are in violation of community bylaws by attempting to sell without authorization." Thomas read it twice, disbelief turning into calm fury. He signed the papers anyway, and mailed them certified directly to the county, bypassing the HOA entirely. Outside, a motion light flicked on. Someone was watching the house. Over the next week, things escalated. Karen began patrolling past Thomas's home every morning. HOA volunteers inspected his trash cans, citing improper lid closure. When Thomas asked her to stop, she smiled tightly and said, "You'll regret this defiance." Later that night, his wife found their mailbox pried open. The county sale documents were gone. Thomas replaced the box and installed a camera, quietly. The next morning, the camera caught something that made his jaw tighten. Karen, in her HOA blazer, standing on his porch, trying her master key on his front door. Thomas went to the HOA office, printed screenshot in hand. Karen didn't deny it. "You're still under HOA jurisdiction until your sale clears," she said coldly. "I was conducting an inspection." Thomas's calm cracked. "That's not an inspection. That's breaking and entering." Karen's smile froze. "Careful. We know how to handle troublemakers here." She made a phone call as he left. 2 hours later, a patrol car slowed near his driveway. The officer inside stared for a long moment before driving off. Thomas's phone buzzed, an unknown number. "If you're going to break HOA rules, the police will deal with you." Thomas spent that night talking to his son Daniel, a quiet, disciplined young man recently transferred to the local police department. When Thomas explained what was happening, Daniel's expression went hard. "Dad, record everything. Don't argue with her. If she tries anything else, call me. Not 911. Thomas nodded. For the first time, he felt a little safer. But safety didn't last long. The next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to his door. "Property subject to HOA disciplinary review. Non-compliance will result in enforcement. The word hung like a storm cloud. By midweek, the disciplinary hearing notice turned into a spectacle. HOA board members stood in Thomas's yard, measuring his fence and photographing his truck. Neighbors peeked from windows but said nothing. No one crossed Karen. When Thomas stepped outside, Karen called out, "We're assessing fines for unauthorized vehicle storage and landscaping violations." He gestured toward the "for sale" sign. "I won't be here long enough for you to collect." Karen's eyes glinted. "Oh, I think you will be." That night, the sound of gravel crunching woke Thomas again, headlights sweeping across his yard. The same white SUV, Karen's. The next morning, Thomas had had enough. He called his realtor, confirmed the county sale approval had gone through, and legally disenrolled from the HOA. He posted the confirmation letter right on his mailbox. At noon, Karen stormed onto his property, shouting for him to come outside. "You can't just leave," she barked. "You're under covenant." Thomas calmly handed her a copy of the county release. "Not anymore." Her hands trembled as she read it. "Then I'll call the cops," she hissed, "and tell them you're trespassing on my jurisdiction." She actually dialed. Within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up. Karen waved frantically, explaining how a rogue homeowner was defying HOA law. Thomas stayed on his porch, silent but ready. The first officer stepped out, looked at Thomas, and froze for a moment. A slow smile crossed his face. Then he said, "Mom, step away from the property." Karen blinked in confusion. "Mom!" From the back of the car, another figure stepped out. Officer Daniel Briggs, Thomas's son, his badge glinting under the sunlight. Karen's triumphant grin shattered into disbelief, and the entire neighborhood started filming. Karen realizes the backup officer she called might not be on her side. The cul-de-sac went silent. Neighbors lined up along their porches, phones out, catching every second of the bizarre showdown. Karen's jaw fell open. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Daniel adjusted his belt, calm and professional. "Responding to a call about harassment, ma'am. Turns out that's you." Karen's face flushed crimson. "This is my community. He's under our covenants. He can't leave." Thomas stayed quiet, arms crossed. He'd learned Karen fed on arguments. Daniel's tone hardened. "The county released this property 3 days ago. You have no authority here." Karen's voice wavered between rage and panic. "No, that's not possible." "We approved." "Wrong," Daniel cut in. "You stalled it. Dad finished it himself." Her lips trembled. "You tricked us." "No," Thomas said evenly. "I just stopped letting you trick me." And with that, Karen's entire power facade cracked. By now, half the neighborhood had gathered, whispering and filming. Karen noticed the phones. Her posture stiffened, her voice pitching higher. "This man is a troublemaker. He's always been against community order," someone in the back muttered. "He just wanted to move, Karen." Her eyes snapped toward them. "Whose side are you on?" But the faces looking back weren't loyal anymore, just tired. Daniel stepped closer. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and step off his property." Karen pointed at Thomas's house. "This is still HOA territory." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then you won't mind if I check county records right now?" He tapped into the department's system on his tablet, one quick lookup. When he turned the screen around, the digital stamp read, "Property outside HOA jurisdiction." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face drained of color. Karen stumbled over her words. No, I filed a hold request." "It's pending review." Daniel frowned. "Pending review doesn't mean you get to harass homeowners." She tried to steady herself. "I have documentation," Thomas interrupted quietly. "Like the one you stole from my mailbox?" A murmur passed through the crowd. Karen froze, realizing the mailbox theft was recorded. Thomas reached into his pocket and held up his phone, screen showing security footage, her in full daylight opening his mailbox. She took a half step back. "Want me to play it for everyone?" he asked, her hands clenched into fists. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel stepped between them. "Enough. Ma'am, you're interfering with private mail. That's a federal offense." Karen's breath hitched. The power she'd built for years was slipping through her fingers. Karen's voice trembled as she tried to laugh it off. "You wouldn't arrest a community leader, would you?" Daniel's eyes softened, not with sympathy, but with disappointment. "Leadership doesn't mean breaking laws. It means following them first." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand what this HOA means to people." "No," Thomas cut in quietly. "We understand exactly what it means. Control, fear, fines." Karen's composure shattered. She spun toward the neighbors. "Don't you see? Without me, this place falls apart." A man in the crowd, Mr. Jensen, the elderly neighbor she once fined for having a flagpole, shouted, "Maybe it's time it does." Laughter broke through the tension. Karen turned beet red, glaring at everyone. Then, in a trembling whisper, she said, "I'll fix this myself." And she stormed away toward her car. Thomas and Daniel exchanged wary looks. "What does she mean by that?" Thomas asked. Daniel sighed. "She's not the type to admit defeat quietly." They walked back toward the porch, but Thomas stopped when he saw it. Another envelope taped to the door. Karen must have done it before she called the cops. Inside, a formal HOA notice demanded $14,700 in unpaid fines for disobedience, unkempt lawn, and hostile communication. Daniel scanned it, incredulous. "She fabricated all this. She's trying to bury us under paperwork," Thomas said. "If she can't win legally, she'll drown us administratively." Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we'll drain her by the book. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, I need a record pull on HOA Cedar Hollow and its board filings. While the neighbors dispersed, Daniel stayed inside with his father, running through county records. Each click revealed something worse. Irregular fees, unauthorized bank transfers, falsified signatures. Karen had been manipulating HOA funds for years. Thomas leaned over. So the fines weren't just harassment. They were revenue. Daniel nodded grimly. She's been funneling the money through a shell vendor. Landscaping company that doesn't exist. Thomas sat back, stunned. So every fake rule, every fine, paid for her vacations most likely, Daniel said. This is grand theft, not bad management. He printed the records, stacking them neatly on the table. We'll give her one more chance to back down, Daniel said, before this goes to the state. The next morning, Daniel returned, this time in full uniform, accompanied by another officer and a county investigator. Karen was on her lawn, already shouting at a neighbor about recycling bins when the cruiser pulled up. Her words trailed off as Daniel stepped out, clipboard in hand. Karen Albright, he said evenly. We need to talk about your association's financial records. She laughed nervously. You can't investigate me. I'm a volunteer official. Then you have nothing to hide, Daniel said, showing the documents. When she saw her own forged signature, her face went pale. She turned toward the onlookers, but this time no one met her eyes. Even her closest allies stayed silent. This is a misunderstanding, she whispered, backing away. A simple error, Daniel replied quietly. Then you'll have no problem explaining it downtown. Karen's composure collapsed completely. You can't do this to me. I built this community. Daniel kept his tone steady. And now you'll answer for how you ran it. He read her rights carefully, as neighbors filmed in stunned silence. Thomas watched from his porch, not gloating, just quietly exhaling years of tension. When Daniel gently guided Karen toward the cruiser, she twisted one last time, shouting, You'll regret this! They'll side with me, everyone always does! But no one moved. No one spoke. The car door shut softly, muffling her protests. And as the police lights reflected across the rows of perfect lawns, Thomas finally felt what he hadn't in a decade. Peace. Karen's arrest isn't the end. It's just the start of a deeper uncovering of her HOA empire's corruption. By evening, Cedar Hollow had turned eerily quiet. The once busy HOA office was dark, its blinds drawn. Neighbors whispered across driveways, half-stunned that the untouchable Karen Albright had been taken away in handcuffs. Thomas sat on his porch with a mug of tea, watching the sunset over the same lawns that once felt like prison bars. Daniel joined him, still in uniform. She's being processed for fraud, tampering, and harassment. County investigators are all over it, Thomas exhaled, the first real breath of freedom he'd felt in years. But Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from his precinct. Possible HOA cover-up. Board members requesting legal protection. He frowned. Dad, this goes deeper than just her. And somewhere down the street, a light flicked on inside the abandoned HOA office. Later that night, Thomas noticed a faint movement near the HOA building, a silhouette slipping through the door, flashlight in hand. He called Daniel immediately. Someone's in there. Within minutes, Daniel arrived quietly, parking without lights. They approached on foot, hearts pounding. Through the window, they saw two men, board members, Mr. Greer and Ms. Linton, frantically shredding files. Daniel's jaw tightened. Destroying evidence. He whispered into his radio for backup. Thomas's voice was low, controlled. She didn't act alone, did she? No, Daniel said. She just led the orchestra. When the backup lights hit the building, the board members froze mid-motion, caught in the act. The following morning, Cedar Hollow's headlines exploded. HOA corruption ring exposed. President and board under investigation. Neighbors gathered outside the office as investigators carried out boxes of documents. Thomas watched silently as one officer told him, They found records going back 5 years. Falsified budgets, double-charged dues, even threats mailed to dissenters. He shook his head slowly. All those years, and nobody said a word. An older neighbor stepped up beside him. "We were scared, Tom. She fined people for speaking up." Thomas put a hand on the man's shoulder. "Not anymore." But as peace settled over Cedar Hollow, Daniel received another call from the DA's office. "We've got a problem," the voice said. "Someone's trying to bail Karen out, anonymously." The news hit Daniel like a punch. "Anonymous?" he repeated. "You can't post bail for someone without leaving a trace." "Normally, no," said the DA. "But whoever it is used a corporate bond, out of state." Thomas overheard the call and frowned. Someone's protecting her. That night, Daniel checked Karen's records again and found a curious transaction. A wire transfer from a legal fund labeled Cedar Property Alliance, LLC. He cross-referenced it. The company had been quietly funding HOAs across 3 counties, all run by the same consulting firm. Thomas realized it before Daniel said it aloud. Karen wasn't the leader. She was the pawn. And if someone wanted her free, it meant they had a lot to lose. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled into Cedar Hollow just after dawn. Karen stepped out wearing sunglasses and a blazer, free on bail. She didn't look defeated anymore. She looked prepared. Neighbors froze as she walked past them, chin high. "I'm still the president until a formal dissolution," she declared. Thomas came outside, disbelief turning to anger. "You're under investigation," he said. "You don't belong here." Karen smiled faintly. "Legally, I do. You'll see." She handed a letter to Daniel, who'd arrived minutes later, a formal injunction preventing any interference with her HOA activities until trial. "You can't stop me yet, officer," she said softly. "And I'm not finished." That evening, Thomas noticed something strange. All the HOA's old notices, the fines, warnings, and bylaws, had been reposted on the neighborhood's bulletin board overnight. At the bottom, a note read, "Order must be restored." "KA!" Neighbors began to panic again. Some feared their fines would return. Others locked their mailboxes. Thomas gathered a few residents in his driveway. "She's bluffing. The HOA's under investigation." But then Daniel arrived, visibly frustrated. "She's using a legal loophole, claiming she's preserving records, not enforcing them. The DA's office is tied up in paperwork." Thomas clenched his fists. "So she's playing delay games," Daniel nodded. "And she's buying time." In the distance, Karen's house lights flicked on, and the glow of multiple laptops lit up through her window. Thomas refused to let the neighborhood fall into fear again. He and Daniel began meeting with residents nightly, gathering statements, video evidence, and past letters. A retired judge living nearby helped them draft a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely, legally and permanently. But Karen was one step ahead. The next morning, everyone who had signed the petition found fake violation warnings taped to their doors. Daniel sighed. "She's got someone feeding her info." Thomas looked toward the HOA office and spotted movement again. One of Karen's old allies was slipping through the back door holding a laptop bag. Thomas whispered, "We're not fighting a person anymore. We're fighting a system built on fear." That night, Daniel called a quiet emergency meeting at the town hall, not HOA property, but county ground. Nearly every resident showed up, tired faces but hopeful ones. Daniel stood before them, uniform crisp but voice calm. "She can't fine you anymore," he said. "Not legally, but she's using fear as a weapon. That ends tonight." He held up copies of the investigation files, proof of misused funds, fraud, and harassment. Gasps filled the room. People murmured, realizing how deeply they'd been controlled. Then, one by one, neighbors began signing the petition in front of a notary. Thomas watched with quiet pride. And as the final signature hit the page, Daniel's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have gone public. She's not working alone. The community might have united, but unseen forces, the corporate shadow behind Karen, are about to push back hard." Daniel stared at the text glowing on his screen. "You shouldn't have gone public. She's not working alone." He traced the number, unlisted, routed through an encrypted server. Whoever sent it was careful. Thomas noticed his son's expression. "What's wrong?" Daniel hesitated. "Someone's watching. Someone outside the neighborhood." He showed him the message. Thomas frowned. "That must be the group funding Karen, the Cedar Property Alliance." Daniel nodded. "They own dozens of HOAs. If we expose them, their entire business model collapses." A chill crept over both men as headlights swept past their window, a dark SUV rolling slowly down the street. Inside, silhouettes watched their house before driving away. Daniel dug into the Alliance's records the next morning, using his department clearance to request public filings. Most were clean on paper, too clean. Every HOA Karen had connections with was listed under the same financial consultant, Northway Management Group. The company's listed address led to an empty office park in another state. Thomas leaned over the documents. So they hide behind shell companies, using people like Karen to keep neighborhoods dependent. "Exactly," Daniel said. "HOAs pay them for legal support, they skim fees, and homeowners can't trace it." They realized this wasn't corruption in one town. It was systemic. Then, Thomas said quietly, Cedar Hollow just became their biggest threat. That night, Thomas returned home from a quick grocery run and noticed his front door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen, but his computer was open, files rearranged. On the screen was a single document left behind. "Cease involvement or expect retaliation." No signature. He called Daniel immediately, who arrived minutes later with a flashlight and scanned the scene. "Whoever did this knew what to look for," he said. Thomas swallowed hard. "They're trying to scare me off." Daniel met his father's eyes. "Then it's working and on them. They're panicking." In the reflection of the dark window, a shadow moved past their driveway. The next day, local news vans rolled into Cedar Hollow. Someone had leaked the investigation to the press, photos, arrest reports, even HOA meeting footage. Karen was front-page news again, branded the Queen of Control. Reporters flooded the gates, asking residents how it felt to live under her rule. For once, the neighbors spoke freely. "She fined me for painting my mailbox. She banned my dog because he barked twice in a week." The coverage spread fast, trending across the state. But amid the chaos, Karen stayed hidden inside her home, curtains drawn. Until one reporter caught a photo of her meeting someone in that same black sedan, a man wearing a Northway lapel pin. That image changed everything. Daniel sent it to his contact at the DA's office. "This is our link," he said. "Northway's in it directly." Hours later, the DA confirmed it. The man in the photo was Richard Leland, Northway's regional director and Karen's quiet sponsor. Thomas clenched his jaw. "So that's who paid her bail?" Daniel nodded grimly. "And now he's here to clean up her mess." Meanwhile, Northway's lawyers filed an emergency injunction to suppress all evidence from being shared publicly. If granted, it would silence the entire case. Thomas stared at the news ticker flashing across his TV. "Judge to hear HOA evidence suppression motion tomorrow." Tomorrow could erase everything they'd fought for. That night, a storm rolled over Cedar Hollow, thunder cracking, wind rattling shutters. Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at years of HOA letters, fines, and notices spread before him. He realized every one of them told a story, not of rules, but of fear. Daniel came in quietly. "You okay?" Thomas looked up. "I can't let them bury this, son. People deserve to know." Daniel nodded, then placed a small flash drive on the table. "All the data, financials, recordings, mail theft footage. If anything happens tomorrow, this goes to the state network automatically." Thomas smiled faintly. "You really thought ahead." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Karen's dark house across the street. For just a second, a figure stood in her window, watching them. The next morning, the county courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the steps, residents filled the gallery, and at the defense table sat Karen, pale, eyes downcast, beside Richard Leland and his polished lawyers. Daniel sat with the DA while Thomas waited in the back, heart pounding. Northway's lawyer spoke first, calm and confident. "These are baseless claims. Our client's HOA work was lawful. Any irregularities are clerical. Then the DA stood, holding up Daniel's compiled evidence, spreadsheets, video, and a signed affidavit from 2 whistleblowers. The judge leaned forward. "This is substantial." Richard Leland's smile faltered for the first time. Karen whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. And then, mid-hearing, the door opened. A federal agent stepped inside and handed the judge a sealed envelope. The judge read the document silently, eyes narrowing. Then she looked up. "Effective immediately, federal investigators are assuming jurisdiction over this case. Mr. Leland, Ms. Albright, you are both under federal review for financial misconduct and racketeering." Gasps filled the courtroom. Leland stood furious. "This is outrageous!" Karen turned pale, whispering, "You said they'd protect us." Thomas closed his eyes in relief. The truth was finally breaking through. As agents escorted Leland and Karen out, cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Outside, Daniel exhaled deeply. "It's over." Thomas looked at the courthouse steps, rain washing away the last of the chaos. But as they walked to their car, Daniel's phone buzzed again, a final text from an unknown number. "You stopped one HOA. There are hundreds more. The battle is won, but the war against the corrupt HOA system is only beginning." The storm had cleared by morning, but Cedar Hollow felt like a different place. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering about Karen's arrest, about how long they'd been afraid to speak. For years, she had ruled with letters and fines, but now her house stood silent, the HOA office sealed off with federal tape. Thomas walked through the neighborhood with a quiet sense of disbelief. He saw kids playing in yards again, mailboxes unpainted, flags back on porches. For the first time, it looked like home. But he also saw fear lingering in their eyes, the question everyone avoided asking: what happens next? At the local FBI field office, Daniel sat across from 2 federal investigators. They'd already been briefed on Northway's operations and wanted details only he could provide. Daniel explained the data, how the shell companies laundered HOA funds into maintenance fees, then funneled money into private accounts overseas. The agents exchanged glances. "You realize this is bigger than property disputes," one said. "This is organized racketeering." Daniel nodded grimly. "Then you'll need every document. My father and I kept backups." The lead agent smiled faintly. "Good, because we'll be calling you both as witnesses." As Daniel left the room, he noticed Karen being escorted down the hallway in handcuffs, eyes hollow, whispering something under her breath he couldn't hear. Days later, the news leaked. Karen had struck a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she was giving up everything she knew about Northway: dates, clients, and the people who funded her control. Thomas read the headline over his morning coffee. "She's turning on them," he said softly. Daniel nodded. "It's the only move she has left." Still, Thomas couldn't help but feel something heavy. For all her arrogance, Karen had been manipulated too, promised power she never really had. And somewhere buried under the outrage, he almost pitied her. That night, Karen's recorded testimony aired publicly, naming names higher than anyone expected, including 2 county officials and a real estate developer. Cedar Hollow began the slow process of rebuilding. The HOA board was officially dissolved under federal order, and residents voted to form a new open committee, one that valued transparency. Thomas was asked to serve as the interim chairman. At first, he refused. "I didn't fight to run another HOA," but Daniel smiled. "Maybe this time it's not about rules. It's about rebuilding trust." Reluctantly, Thomas agreed. The first meeting was held under open sky, not in a stuffy office. No fines, no intimidation, just neighbors talking again. And in that moment, Thomas realized the neighborhood wasn't broken. It had just forgotten what community meant. Weeks later, Daniel visited his father with good news. "The Bureau says the Northway case is expanding. They've frozen all their assets and charged 3 executives." Thomas smiled proudly. "You did good, son." But Daniel shook his head. "We did this together." They walked outside, looking at the neighborhood bathed in evening light. Children laughed, sprinklers hissed, and for once no one was patrolling for violations. A peace Thomas hadn't felt in years settled in. Then a plain envelope slid under his door that night. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single USB drive labeled simply Phase 2. Thomas hesitated before plugging it into his laptop. Inside were encrypted documents, spreadsheets, and communications between HOA heads in other states, referencing something called the Integration Project. Each file listed towns, dates, and properties under review, all linked to Northway's sister companies. Daniel arrived minutes later after his father's call. "This looks like a nationwide network," he murmured. Thomas leaned back, weary but resolute. "Then this isn't over." One file name stood out, Silverwood Expansion, pending authorization, and below it, a familiar name signed the document, Richard Leland. Despite his arrest, it seemed Richard Leland had already built safety nets. He'd made deals long before his capture, leaving behind proxies to continue operations. Daniel clenched his fists. He planned for this. Even if he's in custody, his system keeps running. Thomas sighed. Then we stopped the system, not just the man. The two began reaching out to other victims, homeowners, whistleblowers, and small-town officials who had faced similar HOA control. A movement began forming online. Yas take back our homes. And though quiet at first, it grew fast, spreading far beyond Cedar Hollow. For the first time, Thomas felt they were no longer alone. Months later, a Senate hearing opened on national television. The banner read, "Investigation into HOA exploitation networks." Among those called to testify, Thomas and Daniel Reed. As they took their seats, cameras clicked, flashes lit the room. Thomas looked at his son, the same boy who had once stormed into his living room in uniform, now standing beside him not as an officer, but as an equal. He smiled. "You ready?" Daniel nodded. "Always," Thomas began his statement. "This isn't a story about one neighborhood. It's about people who were told they didn't have a voice, and finally found one." The room went silent. Outside, the sunrise broke over Washington. The fight that began in one small town had become something far larger, a movement to reclaim freedom, one home at a time.